we can continue to fight for freedom. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today. Simply go to tntradio.live. Deconstructing psyops, propaganda, and mainstream media garbage. Connecting the dots. You're with Matt Ehret and Connecting the Dots on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome back to the third hour of Connecting the Dots. I am your host, Matt Ehret, and I've had a lot of friends over the years who would tell me stories that I love talking about ideas and politics, but my boyfriend, my girlfriend, my wife, my husband, they don't care about ideas. They don't care about these things, and so they're feeling very, very frustrated, and I want to feel, I feel empathy and sympathy, but at the same time, I feel gratitude that I don't have that problem at all. And Cynthia Chung has been my partner, my friend, my co-researcher, and she has done amazing work making breakthroughs on matters of intelligence history that have just blown my mind and have blown a lot of people's minds. Recently, she came out with a new book, it was last year, called The Empire on Which the Black Sun Never Set, a history of Anglo-American presence in shaping international fascism. That would be volume 1 of what is becoming a series of books really going deeper into the nature and heart of fascism and how our world just became so damn messed up. What exactly happened? Did conventional military just become insane by itself, or has there been something systematic shaping this insanity? Which obviously, for those watching this show and who have encountered Cynthia's writings, the answer is, there's something to be discovered, which is dark, but it's important to look at it, map it out. And recently, Cynthia has written a couple of very important essays that are a part of what will be volume 2 of The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Set, which are extremely relevant for today. So I'm going to bring on Cynthia. Cynthia Chung, thank you for coming on as my guest on Connecting the Dots.
Always a pleasure.
All right. So you wrote recently a couple of pieces, one on how Panama became the Skynet for Orwellian totalitarianism in the Americas, and something else as a follow-up, whose name I'm kind of forgetting off the top of my head, dealing with a deeper dive on Operation Gladio, Vietnam, and some of the unresolved elements of fascists who were incorporated into Western intelligence after World War II. This is something that is so important. And today we have, in the news, announcements that Taiwan is going to be hosting Green Berets, who will be training the Taiwanese military in their freedom struggle against big bad China. And a lot of people who consume the media in the West are supposed to sort of feel warm, fuzzy feelings like our heroes, the Green Beret heroes, are defending freedom again. They were also in Ukraine, as we discovered last night, looking at, what else have the Green Berets been doing lately? Well, they were in Ukraine since the beginning of this whole operation against Russia, using a bunch of Ukrainian proxies, training Ukrainian militia and soldiers. We see them also with a deep presence all over South America for many, many years, decades even. So what is this? How should people be thinking about the Green Berets? Is this really a patriotic agency, as we've been told, or is there something darker at play?
Well, in order to understand what the Green Berets are, you need to first look at what they were modeled off of, which was the British Special Forces. So contrary to what a lot of people, I think, have been led to believe, Kennedy was not responsible at all for the Green Berets, not even the revival of the Green Beret program during his presidency. But in fact, they were started as a World War II Special Forces unit. Again, inspired by and closely working with the British Special Forces in Europe, such that the Green Beret is a tip of the hat to the British Special Forces. They were brothers in arms. And this was a part of what would become known as Churchill's secret armies. So Operation Unthinkable was something that Churchill was concocting shortly after Roosevelt's death, while World War II was still ongoing, with the two possible premises that either we would need stay-behind units, because it was clear that Germany was going to lose, but we would still need stay-behind units stationed all throughout Europe in case of either a Russian invasion or just to have like a kind of defense, just in case kind of thing. And it ended up not happening, obviously. And they justified that they still needed to stay in these areas throughout Europe because there was the threat of communism becoming democratically chosen in governments. Italy was the first election that was going to happen after World War II. And it was clear that the communists were going to be voted into that government because the communists were the ones who primarily fought against Mussolini. And that was the case for many of these countries. It was the communists who actually did the most to fight back the Italian fascists and the German Nazis. And so obviously there was a lot of popular support. And this was something that was considered intolerable to Churchill, who was very much also in control of American foreign policy. So that's what the Green Berets come out of, is Churchill's secret armies. And there's been a declassification in the late 1990s. There was one of the biggest declassifications of the Nazi and Japanese fascist papers that were, held by the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, so forth. And it also incorporates British intelligence as well. And that's when we started to realize more concretely what these secret armies, these stay-behind units were actually doing, which was terrorism. They were committing terrorism against the European people and the American people. This is also a continuation of like COINTELPRO type operations that were done against the civil rights movement. They're connected. Operation Northwoods was something that was actually, proposed to Kennedy to stage a false flag attack on the American people and American military personnel and blame it on Castro as an excuse to invade Cuba. So these were the kinds of things, some of them, didn't happen, and a lot of them did, including assassinations of democratic leaders. De Gaulle had over 30 assassination attempts, and the stay-behind units were involved in a great deal of that. So this was clearly very undemocratic, very, the opposite of what they were saying, which was that this was supposed to be a protection of the people against totalitarianism. So the Green Berets have continued to be that, either under Eisenhower's administration, because Eisenhower was aware of this. He was, obviously a veteran of World War II. He was in the know, but there were a lot of people who were not in the know of this because it was still highly classified at the time. And so when Kennedy came in, this stuff was basically revived under Allen Dulles, the director of the CIA, during the transition of the Eisenhower and Kennedy administration. And Kennedy had absolutely nothing to do with it. And the guy that you forgot the name of, Matt, it's Colonel Fletcher Prouty, who is the one who's written the book, The Secret Team, as well as JFK, and it's a very long title, I think it's like Vietnam and the assassination of Kennedy. And he goes over this. He was the liaison between the Pentagon and the CIA. And he knew Allen Dulles quite closely in terms of a working relationship between the Pentagon and the CIA. So this is what occurred. I could go on.
That's great. No, that's no, that was a thorough answer. That was good. And when you say that they were carrying out terrorist acts, and you brought up Northwoods as a justification to invade a country, you brought up assassination attempts of high value targets like de Gaulle, like JFK, many others. there's also the question of terrorist acts in general to the populace, which surprised me. It was only with your work that I started appreciating that was actually I didn't realize what this was. We hear about the Red Brigades, we hear about these different anarchist, anti-imperial, liberation. Were in the 60s. So how is this not Marxist-Leninist? How is this actually tied to this Gladio, or one of the techniques of the Gladio secret army operation, and how did they benefit from that?
The ideology behind it was, essentially a kind of Christian fascist outlook that was closely, wanting to bring back the romantic idea.
Are we on the air?
Am I on the air?
You're on the air?
On the air 24/7. Your news talk giant, TNT.
All right, welcome back to the second segment of Connecting the Dots. Apologies for those watching. There was a little bit of a weird break there. There was a technical glitch in the system. Do apologize for that. But we're back here with Cynthia Chung, and she was just going through a little bit of an answer to my question, which was, well, what is the strategy? What was the strategy behind bombing civilian centers across Europe, letterbox bombs across Quebec and New York and the US and everything else? How are these not actually Marxist-Leninist organizations as they were portrayed, carrying out these attacks against evil capitalist empire, that was the message of the 60s? Well, how is this actually tied to the Nazi fascist Gladio NATO secret army networks? What did they want to accomplish by that? And then I have a question about Colonel Fletcher Prouty and something about the reform of the U.S. military after you finish that.
Mm-hmm. Well, they were blaming it on the communists. So obviously, that was going to make the communists look bad. And it was thought that, people would be pushed away and towards the arms of a far right-wing government. Because the thing is that, and, Alex Craner, he's also done really good work to back this up, that World War II is not what we've been told in terms of the Allies, versus the bad guys. And the reality of the situation was that there were a lot of people in England, in the United States, in France, who were supporting this trend towards a fascist way of government. And, there were people who preferred Mussolini's fascist corporatism versus, Hitler, who was, a little bit more unpredictable and over the top. But at the end of the day, that was what the idea was, the League of Nations concept, which was to have about 6 control centers in the world, and that the rest of the world was going to be like one big satrapy. And breadbasket to service these control centers. So that is what the League of Nations is. And that's what has always been the mission. And even though we technically won World War II, that was not supposed to happen, by the way, and Russia was supposed to have been destroyed in World War II, according to these planners. They just ended up continuing these policies, some of it underground, like the secret army type activity, but some of it was, embedded in institutions and so forth. And it has been just working slowly towards another opportunity to bring this online, in a global way. And so again, the ideology behind this is there's a lot of Christian fascism involved in this. There's a reason why, the Pope at the time was not talking against Mussolini's actions in Italy. And there's this idea of revival of the Crusades and the whole, belief system that comes with that. Yeah.
Which is really just Satanism masquerading as Christianity. When one looks at really in a sober mind what the Crusades were, it really wasn't a Christian thing. That was like Christians killing Christians and Jews and Muslims, and it was all geopolitical, and it was a bloodbath of death for centuries around geopolitical operations. But this is the type of thing that they're trying to revive in the new age, as far as redefining what makes one a proper Christian, is to be effectively a crusading fascist. And you brought up how the ideology of these special forces runs completely contrary to the type of historic traditional ideology of defense of the military, of the citizen soldier, which is, I guess, very much it is this, right? It's like, this is not America. This is not what America was grounded upon, or any nation that's viable. This is something that sort of infused itself as a corrupting influence, as a different ideology, which is just permanent war, permanent revolution. But on that note,
that's why Eisenhower had brought that up, right? And in his farewell address, which had a lot of, obviously, problems in terms of him just like, basically announcing that he had this monster festering in the basement the whole time called the military industrial complex. And it's like, okay, I'm off now. But he was also bringing up the point of the citizen soldier, in that a responsible nation that actually is caring for the welfare of their own people, because, by the way, war also puts into jeopardy the safety of your own people, right? You want to have a balance in the world that is mutual respect and mutual cooperation in a reasonable way. And when you have a permanent war machine, that's clearly for an imperialistic purpose. That's not a defensive purpose. And so Eisenhower clearly saw that this was a problem. And as Prouty makes a point in his books, Eisenhower, at least to his credit, was not allowing the special forces to continue, because that was not supposed to be something that continued during peacetime. It kind of made sense in certain ways during World War II, but it was absolutely unacceptable, besides the fact that they were, even on top of this, committing terrorism against their own people to manipulate people's political views. It's not in anyone's best interest to have a permanent warrior unit like that. And that's what the U.S. Special Forces was. And this is what Allen Dulles ended up reviving, so that he could wield that weapon under the direction of the CIA. I don't know if you wanted to have a follow-up question before I go further.
Yeah. No, that's no. By bringing up Dulles as well, and the CIA in general, as this new institution that was created as the basis of a parallel state, effectively, is what you're saying. Right. You made the point in your papers that it became increasingly difficult to discern the difference between CIA operatives and conventional military, and this reform of the U.S. military that Prouty talks about and that you document. How did that CIA infiltration and takeover occur over the course of I guess the Cold War, and over people like JFK's dead body? Well, how do they do that?
Well, it started with Frank Wisner, and Frank Wisner, Allen Dulles, they were already a part of the OSS before they went into the CIA. And David Talbot, in his the Devil's Chessboard, has documented very well, made a very solid point that Allen Dulles was involved with traitorous activity in Switzerland, communicating with Nazis and helping Nazis. So was his brother, John Foster Dulles, who was the Secretary of State under Eisenhower's administration. And basically, Frank Wisner had started a clandestine operations unit as an offshoot from the CIA that was working with the secret armies in Europe. So they were basically continuing a Churchill, foreign policy, even though this was not agreed upon as an American foreign policy. And they basically were operating without any kind of purview from the American government or the American military. They weren't often aware at all with what this unit was. And the CIA was supposed to be a desk job, but this thing just got out of hand. And I think that, Churchill also played a very big role with the Iron Curtain speech and having a lot of, control and pressure over American foreign policy that shaped, the Cold War. American foreign policy under the Cold War was completely shaped by Churchill's decisions. So this was brewing. And the clandestine operations started to become under the purview of the CIA. So you had the US military for anything that was open warfare, but anything that was considered clandestine increasingly became the responsibility of the CIA. But it started to get to a ridiculous point. The Vietnam War was probably the most ridiculous one, where they were claiming that there was clandestine operations, thus CIA should be completely in charge of the situation, when everybody in Vietnam knew what was going on, everyone in China knew, and everyone in the Soviet Union knew what Americans were doing in Vietnam. It wasn't clandestine anymore. So this started to allow the CIA to expand what basically a paramilitary, which is kind of like an underground military, a black ops military that is not answering to the president, not answering to anybody in government, not answering even to the US military. And then when Dulles revived the Green Beret program, which had already been manufactured under the Churchill's secret army unit. This was the weapon to continue the, that the League of Nations Christian fascist program.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and you made the point as well that they would go into like up to 40 allied states who were sort of united in stopping the Hitler machine originally, and as part of this reutilization of these unreconstructed fascists and Nazis that were now working for NATO and the CIA, they began to, like you just said, create these paramilitary shadow organizations, infiltrating their police forces, infiltrating their creating subsections within these target nations' national militaries that would not be beholden to the elected representatives of those countries, but would be thus beholden to the centralized command that wasn't tied to any particular country. That's a really fascinating point.
Yeah, these soldiers, the Green Berets, have never been for protecting the people. They serve a master that is separate from government, even separate from the US military. And, when the Green Berets came out of their revival program with their experience in Vietnam, Prouty makes the point, too, that these Green Berets, when they came back to the United States, a lot of them went into police work in the United States, that's not good news. And, they're very experienced with training police units in other countries. So basically, the Green Beret program became an international program. And Prouty makes the point that how the US military got taken over in his book, The Secret Team, he explains that it was Maxwell Taylor, who was this military man who resigned during Eisenhower's administration. And he was brought back in during the Kennedy administration through CIA corridors. And Kennedy was misled to believe that this was like an old soldier that he could rely upon. That was because, Kennedy got screwed over with the Bay of Pigs fiasco. I've done a paper on this, The Damned Murdered Inc., Kennedy's Battle Against the Leviathan. People can check out on my Substack, Through a Glass Darkly. But basically, he got screwed over by elements of the military and the CIA in this. And so he was distrustful of everybody. And so Maxwell Taylor, who had resigned during the Eisenhower administration, was brought in by Allen Dulles. Kennedy didn't know this. And so Kennedy trusted him, and he ended up putting him in chief of Joint Chiefs of Staff. He put him in that position and fired Lemnitzer. But what ended up happening, Prouty makes a very well-documented case for this, is that Maxwell Taylor was not an old soldier of the traditional US military. He was actually for the new form of warfare, counterinsurgency, which is the perpetual war machine, which I don't know if we have a commercial break before I get into that.
No, we got the commercial break out of the way by accident earlier, so we can actually go on for another 10 minutes before we shift gears to commercials. So yeah, you can totally expand on counterinsurgency and pacification tactics and whatever else you want to elaborate on. Go for it.
Yeah, so it was Maxwell Taylor who actually was a CIA man at that point. And at that point, there were a lot of people with government titles who were working for the CIA. Actually, there were CIA agents. McGeorge Bundy is like a very well-known name as an example of that. And there were many people within the US military at that point that were increasingly starting to work for the CIA. But they were under a military title. And so it was making it look like there was this kind of balance within government and military to have all of these different checkpoints of okays, when in fact it was all like CIA control checkpoints, which again, Prouty is the one who documents this very, very well. So the Green Berets were brought into Vietnam, and this is where the warfare of counterinsurgency was expanded upon. The French in the Algerian War were the first ones to start doing this. And again, a lot of these guys who were a part of the Algerian War, they were part of the secret army units. And when de Gaulle wanted to leave Algeria, he didn't want, a French colonial presence there anymore. There were elements of the French military and intelligence that wanted to oust him. So that actually was happening, overlapping the Bay of Pigs.
That's the Algiers putsch, right?
Yeah, the general's push against de Gaulle. And again, like there were sections of the military and the intelligence that served the Christian fascist, ideology that thought de Gaulle was a traitor and they wanted to kill him. There was multiple assassination attempts and they tried to overthrow him as well. This is also why de Gaulle kicked out NATO out of France, because these are known after Churchill's secret armies. They later on became known as NATO's secret armies, and Daniela Ganser has done a very great book, great research on NATO's secret armies that were stationed all around Europe. So de Gaulle was very aware of this, and he kicked NATO out of France. To this day, they try to act like it wasn't that, but it most certainly was that. So anyway, the Green Berets were taking their training manual from these French Christian fascists, basically militant Christian fascists, and they started to expand on the counterinsurgency doctrine in Vietnam, which was basically, how I see it, was just like a laboratory for them. And it was an Orwellian laboratory where they had torture centers. The Phoenix program is notorious for the estimates are over 70,000 people were tortured and murdered in this program. But it was all about, testing out certain kinds of control tactics and psychological warfare tactics and so forth. And again, policing is a central role of the Green Berets. And I would say it's an Orwellian form of policing. People should also be aware that Orwell was stationed in Burma as a chief policeman who engaged in torture techniques in Burma in service to the British Empire. And this is largely where he got his insight from 1984 in terms of the O'Brien character is probably a lot of Orwell's own experience and also observing other people's, how they dealt with torture techniques in Burma. So this program then later on was used in many, many other places in the world. It was expanded globally to about 40 at first. It's now more than that, but Prouty says it was 40 host countries. So these countries accepted the special forces in, and increasingly under Maxwell Taylor, the new philosophy of the US military was supposed to be everything. A reform of everything: politics, education, economics, culture. It's all under the US military now. And we really saw that clearly with the war on terror, the illegal invasion of Iraq, and the US military's stationing in Iraq. That was that program that was being implemented. They think that they have the right to come into a country and do everything their way, and anyone who stands in opposition to that needs to be removed. And so the Special Forces team is largely considered the guardians, the gladiators of the figureheads that are chosen, not by the people, but whatever their master tells them is someone they need to protect. So they're incredibly dangerous. They're the very
it does. Yeah, no, it does seem like it's like a Praetorian Guard, right? Like a Roman legion, elite legion Praetorian Guard that are cultish under the complete. They're not made up of individuals. They are seen, as you just said, as a sword. Operation Gladio. I never thought about it actually until you just said it the way you said it just here and now. Is that the idea of Gladio, which is the Italian word for sword, has that name not because of like some imagery or symbolism of like, hey, that sword looks cool as an icon for this or that, but it's like they see this army force as a tool for whatever geopolitical ends the masters want to wield the sword for, not as made up of people who can make decisions or think as sovereign citizens at all, which is where I guess you get this sort of stuff like we've seen Seymour Hersh early in the 70s document or blow the whistle on things like the My Lai massacre, this ideology of you have to burn down the village to save the village. Like, why did we burn down? Why did we kill all the women and children in the village in Vietnam? Well, we had to burn it down to save it. From what? Like, that's insane. But you get this sort of thing, right? In this whole revolution of military affairs ideology that oversaw Desert Storm, that oversaw hundreds of thousands of children dying since Desert Storm and since 9/11 and the war on terror. There's millions of deaths. And it's like there's this justification of it. Like, it's all worth it. It's all worth it because of X, whatever, imagine. What is that thing that they think makes it all worth it? Like, what are they, what is in their mind that makes burning down the village necessary to save the village, or doing these atrocities, torture of innocents?
I think that they have, it's an ideological belief of how the world should be. And so anything that is not that they think is their purview to demolish and destroy. And I guess we'll get into this maybe. I don't know if we have time to get into this fully, but Operation Condor was the Gladio continuation into South America. And I think a lot of people know that a lot of Nazis went to South America as well. And Operation Gladio was something that was a continuation of the secret army apparatus. Many Nazis as well were involved in training these secret armies in the South American countries, along with the CIA again, and the U.S. Special Forces played a leading role in training the death squads. And the center for training was in Panama. And there was also central.
Let's use that as a very potent bridge into our commercial break, and then we're going to come back on today's News Talk TNT to see where this goes with Panama and the role of Panama in the past and present in geopolitical affairs.
Give me a minute with TNT Radio's Steve Malzberg.
When it comes to the left-wing media, we all know by now they call Donald Trump every name in the book, and they don't cover his speeches very often because they say he lies.
Donald Trump lies about America's greatness. Donald Trump lies about America's men and women in uniform. Donald Trump lies about what small business owners and entrepreneurs and the geniuses of Silicon Valley and what the geniuses on Main Street USA, what they're all doing.
And so-called fact checkers have been living off of Donald Trump. But if anybody dares to fact check Joe Biden, well, watch.
It is ridiculous that the New York Times fact-checked Joe Biden on something. I mean, he vomits lies. Trump vomits lies. And every day, over and over and over again. And it's just ridiculous that the New York Times is doing a fact-check on Biden while they let Trump, while they're numb to the torrent of lies coming out of Trump's mouth.
That's former U.S. Senator Democrat Claire McCaskill, and that's what passes for our media right now. And it's not getting any better. Thanks for giving me a minute. I'm Steve Malzberg. Catch my show Monday through Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on TNT.
My baby's back from the West Coast.
Here are those pictures that you asked for your school project? First day of school, cute as a button.
So long ago.
Oh, here's Grandma Florence after that flood wiped out the whole neighborhood. So
Sometimes I just cannot believe all the storms we've gone through here.
I can only hope that we'll be able to leave this house to you one day, baby. You're our legacy.
Planning for these disasters will make sure we're safe, and is the best way to protect that legacy.
Those beans smell heavenly.
Give Mom a little credit.
You know what? We should make an emergency communication plan. That way we're ready this year.
Great idea.
At my dorm, we have emergency kits for earthquakes and wildfires, but I'm sure there's something more local I can send you with the link.
Okay.
Smart.
I'm coming to share with you guys.
Protect your legacy. Plan for natural disasters today. Visit ready.gov/plan.
Matt Ehret and connecting the dots on today's News Talk Radio, TNT.
All right, welcome back to the third segment of the third hour of Connecting the Dots. I'm here with Cynthia Chung, and after painting a vivid image of destruction that had been caused by the special forces operations that were run by the CIA across Vietnam that interfaced with unreconstructed Nazis, fascists, Italian fascists that tried to kill de Gaulle, that carried out counterinsurgency, pacification, torture techniques, killing a lot of innocent civilians along the way, turning the West into an empire. You mentioned you tied that back into Panama, Latin America, and Panama being the base of operations for this operation. Today, we are being told all sorts of things about how the Chinese, the Chi-Coms, are out trying to destroy America by controlling immigrants from Panama, the Darien Gap, up through into Texas borders to destroy America from within. So we're being fed a lot of Cold War style propaganda right now, ignoring the fact that the real problems of Latin America and Latin American, all pretty much controls of immigrations and everything else, would be under the tight control of that infrastructure that was set up over decades before most people listening here were even born. So what is it about Operation Condor that you're digging up? How does this all tie into Latin America?
Well, along with the huge Declassification Act that happened at the end of the 1990s, where we found out about Gladio and just how awful this whole thing was, the extent of the attacks that were happening on Western people. Condor was also revealed a lot of information on Operation Condor that wasn't known up until that point. And so, like the Pinochet situation, all of this was all a part of Condor. Actually, Chile and Argentina were the main control nodes for Operation Condor in South America that involved about 6 control centers, 6 countries that were working as control centers. And again, the U.S. Special Forces played the leading role in training special forces that would South Americans who would become special forces in their countries, right? The same thing happened in Vietnam. Ngo Dinh Diem, his South Vietnam government, he had Vietnamese people who were also trained by the Green Berets to be his Gladio guards. These the South Americans were also
he was the one who was assassinated, right? Diem?
He was the head of the day-old South Vietnamese government, right, to as an excuse for why the Vietnam War had to happen. By the way, we don't have time to talk about this, but Prouty also makes the point that the whole justification for the U.S. entry into Vietnam was due to a false migrant crisis that had been organized by the CIA, by Edward Lansdale's Saigon mission, where they committed terrorist acts in northern Vietnam and caused a huge, migration of people. They even offered to transport people on boats from North Vietnam to South Vietnam, and then they just unloaded them onto the South Vietnamese people, where, there was not going to be enough resources to support all of these people. Obviously, there was a lot of theft, and there was a lot of crime that was brought into that. And the Americans, the special forces, the CIA were directly involved in creating that false migrant crisis to then bring in the U.S. military. So that's an important point people need to understand, is that the CIA has been creating conflicts in clandestine operations until they get so big that it justifies entry of the US military, which, by the way, is kind of what's starting to happen in Ukraine right now, where we already have NATO soldiers in Ukraine, and there's going to definitely be an increase in that pressure cooker that is going to try to drag the European militaries and the American military into that conflict when it never had to happen that way.
I'll just punctuate that just to make it so clear. If people are listening to this thinking, "Hey, that doesn't affect me. I'm in Europe." That's interesting facts that you're bringing up from the '60s, but that doesn't affect my life. Think again. You got Lloyd Austin also making allusions to having a preparation from NATO to go to war, backing up Ukraine officially. Macron said it openly. Putin has been trying really hard to make it very clear that this is like World War III, end of civilization stuff. Don't do it. And on the other hand, you have the very thing, the immigration crisis, the fact that immigrants will be more, or illegal immigrants especially, are going to be more inclined perhaps to carry out acts of vandalism, theft, other things, when is exactly what is creating the tension, this tension in America today, and chaos, very similar to what was done in Vietnam's case, overseen by the same forces, using the same techniques.
Yeah, like why would so many people in the millions want to leave their homes with like the very young and the very old traveling in incredibly unsafe ways where the risk of you know, either getting robbed or molested or murdered is very high. So obviously these people are in a very desperate situation, and we have to ask the question, well, what is going on in South America that is causing this to occur on a scale that has not been happening for the last few decades? And so the thing with Operation Condor is that it was in, you know, full operation in the 70s up until, I would say, at least the early 90s. And then it looked like it kind of stopped because democratically, you know, elected governments replaced the military dictatorships in South America. By the way, the drug problem in South America is also completely tied to this whole Gladio thing. It's not the communists. The drugs fund the black ops operations that are the Gladio operations. Nixon's war on drugs was basically to centralize American control of the drug money. And that's why we have American soldiers who are in Afghanistan who were babysitting opium fields. And Henrik Kruger, The Great Heroin Coup, that's a very good book for people to reference if they want to know more about that. So anyway, Operation Condor, contrary to what we were told, it continued. It's just, it established parallel states in South America. So we have a whole system of a black ops capability, you know, separate police stations, separate interrogation centers, this kind of scary Orwellian stuff. That's what was set up. And Panama has always been the nerve center of that. And Condor was the computer system where all of these operations could communicate with each other throughout South America and later on Central America. So when people say like US Green Berets, like Michael Yon say, oh, what's going on? People are crossing the border and nothing is happening. The US Special Forces have always been totally, you know, front center involved in this, because the way Operation Condor was that you could get people false passports. They controlled border crossings for their death squads. Like, it's not, this is something that they've had a complete control over through their computer system, Condortel, and the more broad system, Copycami, that the Americans have always been in charge of, to coordinate with all of these Gladio networks. So it's complete bunk that they don't have control over that. They completely do, and they're probably causing the migrants to cross because they're doing clearly stuff in South America that we're not aware of yet. And also, just to very punctuate this, the Gladio networks were responsible for the assassination of Kennedy. And people can go on to my Through Glass Darkly Substack to refer to that. I have an article on the front page that you can find. So this is the biggest threat to and everyone's safety, including, causing escalations that threaten nuclear war on people. This is everything, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're making it very, very clear that this is the case. And I mean, again, you people have this John Wayne image, right? That's been marketed to them through Hollywood of like Green Berets or these noble. And I'm not, I'm sure there's a lot of good people who are Green Berets. There's probably a lot of good people who are there are a ton of good people in the military who were in it they went in because they want to defend their nations. They want to do good and spread freedom and all these good things. But then there's this other thing, which is there as well, which oversaw the murder, which without taking that into consideration, you can't understand why so many Latin American leaders who are trying to nationalize their privatized operations from, that had formerly been controlled by Wall Street bankers and London enterprises. Every time that happens where something is done to try to defend the people of a country, including the United States under John F. Kennedy, they're assassinated. You can't account for why those assassinations happen, why those coups happen, unless you take into consideration what the hell happened to take over control like a virus of our military and our nations, which has no allegiance to the people of America or any nation. It's something else, and it's tied to what made the Crusades happen 1,000 years ago. And I love the fact that in your book, especially The Empire in Which the Black Sun Never Sets, you really make it clear that this is like an imperial Roman Empire fascist revivalism, this restoration of oligarchism under the veneer of some like spiritualized feudalism that rebranded as Christianity that people like Count Coudenhove-Kalergi have been trying to bring about. And I didn't know about so much of this stuff until you plunged into it. But without that, you can't understand how NATO was created, how the European Union was created, how all of these Nazis and fascists went unpunished. But with that in mind, all of a sudden, everything falls nicely into place. Everything kind of makes a lot more sense, and you can account for what is this restoration of these, like, it's become cool increasingly amongst a lot of people within the what's called the trad conservative world to look upon things like the Inquisition or the Crusades or feudalism as the time when things were stable and good before liberals like Soros corrupted us all. And then before progressives allowed for women to get the vote or get out of the house. Before that was when we had stability and morality and traditional values. And it's like, it's kind of mixed in with a lot of very bad things. So like, where's that coming from? How is Peter Thiel, a multi-billionaire tied to big tech and the entire, transhumanist enterprise, why is he promoting this type of thing to revive romanticization of the Crusades? So you have all of this stuff that a lot of good people who we know are finding themselves really influenced by, looking at things as if, the monarchies were great. It was just the Jew bankers who took control of the monarchies of Europe that made things bad. That's what caused all of the bad, is the Jews, right? Who got killed a lot in the Crusades? It was the Jews, right? And we're seeing a revivalism of all the stuff, also now added with this anti-China stuff. So maybe for the last bit, China has definitely been targeted for an operation to destroy them, just like Russia has. They're being encircled by the U.S. military. It's been going on for a while. There's now Green Berets in Taiwan. China is active building infrastructure around the world. That's the case definitely for South America. There's ports that China's been building, hydroelectric dams, electricity grids. That's provable. But most Americans don't know this. They think China is only there to do basically what we've been doing already for like 80 years. What can you say about what is China doing because there are Chinese workers in military age, as they say in all media, military age Chinese workers are there in South America. That's true. What are the sorts of things that they are doing there around the world? Why are they a threat to the thing controlling the CIA?
Well, again, John Perkins in his Confessions of an Economic Hitman, very popular book that I think people need to remind themselves of. South America and Central America were not just attacked by these Condor death squad units. It was also an economic looting of these countries. Pinochet is one of the free market type examples. Right. And that's why fascism also has always had a certain idea of like the fascist corporatism idea. So these countries were attacked economically. And China has always understood this, that you cannot be a sovereign nation state if you don't have economic sovereignty. And the way that you have economic sovereignty is that you have a functional infrastructure and you have an ability to self-sustain yourself to a certain point and trade effectively with what you need to receive in terms of resources. And this has been a central issue for national sovereignty. So it's kind of funny that people think that China is in these areas that have a huge historical record, like Condor, of operating in Central and South America, and they're building things. And we're somehow thinking that the building of things must be sinister. Whereas maybe China actually understands that if you want to have a balance, the best way to address the hegemony that has become clearly destructive, an Anglo-American hegemonic power that goes into countries and literally blows them up and tries to build back better, type approach with US military dictating how the reform is going to go. This is obviously not a good idea. And the reason why China has become very secretive in some of these BRI construction camps is because there has been a lot of terrorist activity against these construction workers, because the hegemonic power clearly doesn't want these things being built because it will allow for increased national sovereignty. And so there is a lot of protection of these camps, and they're of course not going to open their door to just anybody, including, by the way, Michael Yon, who is apparently, trying to get Brett Weinstein a peek into this like camp of like 100 Asians, hostile Asians, because they didn't want to talk to him. Why would they allow a Green Beret to come into their camp? And they're there with the invitation of the Panamanian government, Yeah. So why are the berets there? Do they have permission? This has always been a really big issue with the Americans, is that they apparently think that they can be in any country, even if they're not invited. Whereas another foreign country that's invited into that country for construction projects is apparently not allowed to be there if the Americans don't want them there.
Well, as Brett Weinstein says, the Panamanians didn't even have the respect to ask permission of the U.S. military before they signed an infrastructure deal with China. How dare they not ask permission to build a road and a bridge from the U.S. military first before doing something like that?
That reminds me, there was a
we have 1 minute.
Okay, that reminds me of a German energy minister who had signed a contract with China on the hydrocarbons deal right before Biden became president, and Biden's like, "You didn't wait for me to become president and ask my permission."
Right. Yeah. He's like, no, we're a sovereign nation state. We don't have to ask your permission. And then how much longer do they have to wait for the Nord Stream 2 to get blown up after Biden has said, we're going to blow it up, and Newland said, we're going to blow it up. And everyone's supposed to still thank the United States for their generosity, for allowing the Germans to eat bugs along with the Davos crew. So you got 15 seconds left. Where can people go and follow your work, Cynthia?
Through a Glass Darkly on Substack, and also you can visit our page, risingtidefoundation.net.
That's great. Thank you so much. Till next week, this has been Connecting Dots, today's News Talk TNT.